live the scene of a horrific fatality.
A pair of thieves bashed in her front door and started stealing stuff.
Protesters gathering outside.
Hard to believe it's Winter Weather Awareness Week this week.
We started asking questions.
Welcome to episode 3 of Working Behind the Screens podcast. I am Nate Harrington, joined by Matt Galka. Matt, happy holidays. Hopefully you had a nice break over Christmas and Hanukkah. I celebrate Hanukkah here, and you celebrated Christmas at home. How you doing, buddy?
That's great. I'm back in Florida. I have a nice holiday beard going.
You do?
What the a beard. Let me be the last to wish you a Merry Christmas. Let me be the first to wish you a Happy New Year. Yeah, we're good to go. Christmas was good. How was your Christmas? You celebrate both.
I do.
Christmas and Hanukkah.
Yep, my wife is
both of them good.
Yeah, both of them are fantastic. Had my folks in town here in Birmingham. That was fantastic, and we're still in the middle of Hanukkah. My wife is Jewish, so the first day of Hanukkah was actually Christmas Eve this year. For those of you who don't know, and that doesn't happen very often. I think she said the next time that happens is 100 years from now. So get it while you can, I guess. So we're still right in the middle of Hanukkah, and it ends on New Year's Eve, actually. So it's been a very nice holiday season, a little break from work. You don't normally get in the news business a whole week off. I had Saturday off, and I'm gonna go back to work until next Saturday. So a whole 7 days is phenomenal. So yeah, doing well, man.
It doesn't happen too often that way. Does not usually happen when you get 7 days off. But good for you. Good. Everybody who's listening got to spend it with their families or their loved ones. Hopefully everyone had a great holiday season. And now we're on to episode 3. We're on to episode 3, Nate.
We are, and we wanted to do this a little bit different because of everyone's crazy schedules. I got to be honest, I hadn't kept up with the news like I should. Try to spend time with my family, and hopefully everybody out there.
Endorsement for this podcast. That's great.
Yeah. But we thought it would be a good idea to kind of review some of what we thought would be the top stories of 2016, and then talk to each other, kind of interview each other about our personal top story of the year. And hopefully you'll like the engaging conversation. I'm sure it'll be fantastic. We want to just make everyone aware, Matt, that we're still online and kicking on social media and on our website.
That's right. At WBTS Pod on Twitter, Working Behind the Scenes on Facebook, the Behind the Screens podcast, the website. We all post our social media there. So go to those things. Keep liking, sharing. We appreciate everybody who does listen. That's great. And we've gotten some pretty good feedback so far. Still working out the kinks, but nobody's perfect. But yeah, we're gonna keep humming along. But obviously, at the end of the year, they do a year in review. And what's been the biggest theme of this year is, oh my God, will 2016 end already? Can 2017 just get here? Well, it's almost here. It's almost here. But was 2016 that bad? I guess it depends on which way you look at it. That kind of brings us to our first big story of the year were all the celebrity deaths.
Yeah, and we wanted to stay away from the election because that was obviously on everyone's mind, but it's been done. We're not going to talk about the election. We want to talk about celebrity deaths. And it's interesting. I went back and kind of looked at the online archive of celebrity deaths, how they were handled. A lot of articles have been written, especially since 2009 when Michael Jackson died. That was kind of the pinnacle, I think, of media coverage and celebrity deaths, because that was covered ad nauseum until, up until his funeral in Los Angeles. That was a complete spectacle. It was covered by the media ad nauseum. And you actually compiled a list of some of the more notable folks that passed that were celebrities, and the list, like we all know, is pretty exhaustive.
And when I was compiling the list, I couldn't believe how many people I actually forgot that had passed away this year. And this is what I consider a short list. So Glenn Fry from the Eagles, The Fish, Abe Vigoda, BMXer Dave Mirra, Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, Nancy Reagan, Frank Sinatra Jr., former Toronto Mayor Rob Ford, Gary Shandling, WWE superstar Chyna, Prince, Muhammad Ali, Kimbo Slice, Gordie Howe, Pat Summitt, Miss Cleo, Gene Wilder, Jose Fernandez, Arnold Palmer, Florence Henderson, Fidel Castro, John Glenn, George Michael, Carrie Fisher, as we record, Debbie Reynolds. And that is a short list. I left off, when I was scrolling through, I probably left off
Alan Rickman.
Yeah, Alan Rickman, 30 other names
Yep.
or so. I mean, that is, and like I said, when I was looking at it, I was like, oh man, Dave Mirra. Yeah, he tragically committed suicide. Frank Sinatra Jr. Scalia got lost in my mind because they still haven't nominated another Supreme Court justice. They were waiting for the election. We're big wrestling fans. China, forgot she died this year. Oh, also, unfortunately, Carrie Fisher was obviously in a lot of people's hearts, but the guy who played Admiral Akbar and the guy who played R2-D2 also passed away this year. Mm-hmm. Miss Cleo, who, whether you want to call her a celebrity or not, she was all over the TV with Psychic Hotline. Almost like at this point, because it was over the summer, almost like an afterthought that Muhammad passed away. Mm-hmm. So it's crazy that I guess, and obviously a lot of this has to do with social media and how connected and how we can view all of this stuff up close and personal now. I guess that kind of plays a role, but even this seems like a lot.
It does seem like a lot of people, and I think the coverage when it happens is something that's really interesting, and it all depends on the person, obviously, and their role, I guess, in the greater society. But there seems to be a nostalgia factor when these folks pass away. We remember the good things they did. All of their accomplishments and all of their accolades are what makes the headlines. However, I think sometimes some of the things that maybe we can learn the most from are kind of pushed to the side. Now, all these people have flaws, obviously. George Michael, he had numerous run-ins with the law, numerous bouts with drug abuse. Carrie Fisher had, mental problems, and she was a huge advocate for mental health. All that stuff was put to the forefront, but some of their struggles and some of these other celebrity struggles aren't brought to the forefront. And I think that's what we lose sometimes in the media coverage of these celebrities, their accolades and how great they were. And I think you left Prince off that list.
No, Prince was there. He was right after China.
Okay. But yeah, all these accolades, but some of the things that we can learn the most from these people, that they were normal people, they had flaws, kind of get pushed away. And I think that's what we lose the most when we cover these things as the media. We want to celebrate their lives, obviously, but we also want to try to learn something from their life too. And I think we lose that when we just say, oh, they were the greatest, they were the best. And we don't really focus on what could be a benefit to the greater good.
And, that makes me think of, so Jose Fernandez. And if you're not familiar with Jose Fernandez, who's a superstar Marlins pitcher, a hot young name in Major League Baseball. He destined for great things as a pitcher, and he died in a boating accident. And when it happened, because his story is so crazy, he defected from Cuba and came over basically on a raft. Had this crazy story with his family. And so when he died, a lot of people, especially in Miami, but in that community, were just heartbroken. And then it comes out that him and his friends were apparently partying and under the influence, and it might have caused the boating accident. So it then becomes this situation where, does that take away from that person's death now that we know they were partying or drinking or doing drugs or anything like that? And there are always some, at least in this story, I saw some contrarians out there saying, well, he shouldn't have been doing that. Well, of course he shouldn't have been doing that.
Yeah.
So I always think it's this weird balance of, when you have a celebrity, and celebrities and personal demons usually go hand in hand. It's always this weird balance of, yes, you want to celebrate them, and you don't want to apply some of their behavior, but yes, there are other things. You know, they obviously weren't always. Some of them weren't always the best people in the world. So it's a tough balancing act, I think, and it's tough, I think, sometimes not to whitewash, I guess, the bad behavior just because somebody did pass away.
No, I completely agree. That's stuff that we have to work harder at as just the media, as a whole. We have to tell both sides of the story. There are two sides to every story, and there's two sides to everyone's life. What people saw and the accolades and the great stuff, and also, like you said, the personal demons that most often kind of carry with the personality of celebrities. So now, I mean, not everyone's in that same boat, but I think there is great stuff to be learned from some of their shortcomings, and I think we should expose those, and not really expose them, but report those. So maybe someone struggling with the same thing can be helped in some way. So yeah, I totally agree with that.
Deaths have brought favorite and least favorite phrase of the whole year is, can 2017 just get here already?
Mm-hmm.
And I have people just say that to say that. I guess, I don't know, maybe it's a coping thing or whatever, but like the people who are saying this, do they really think bad things aren't going to happen in 2017? I mean, because I can almost with 100% certainty let you know that bad things will still happen in 2017. I'd actually predict that more celebrities will probably pass away in 2017. And I'm not trying to make a situation, but like, that phrase, oh, can 2017 just get here? Can 2016 just end already? I just feel like it's such a cop-out, phony thing to say. I don't know. Yeah, 2016 has been a bad year. I personally think it just seems worse because of how connected we are now and how in tune we are to everything and how everything can be in our face if we want it, or even if we don't want it, it can just be right there. So it's not like bad things haven't happened in other years. Yeah, plenty of bad things have happened in other years. We just haven't been able to solve it until newsflash, we're going to see a lot more of it.
Yeah, I think you nailed it on the head. All right, we're going to go to our next story, and these stories aren't more. They're still national news, but they're not as broad as what we started with. The first one is going to be the Pulse nightclub shooting, and this was the largest mass shooting in U.S. history. This is the largest terrorist attack in U.S. history since 9/11. And this was a story that hit close to home for a lot of folks for a lot of different reasons. This kind of had, I hate to use the word kind of, it wasn't the perfect story, but it was a confluence of a terrorist attack. It was a confluence of a hate crime. It was also the question of gun control. This story kind of had everything that you would look for to cause a controversy, to cause a back and forth and an argument between folks on two sides of an argument. So first, let's kind of go over the details, and I'll kind of just roughly talk about. This was back in June of this year. Omar Mateen was a security guard in Orlando. He actually killed 49 people. He was killed in the standoff with the police, so he made 50. When it was unfolding, it was one of those things also that we talked about. One of those things that kind of unfolded on social media, on Twitter and on Facebook as well. He swore allegiance to the Islamic State, to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who's the leader of ISIS. He proclaimed in a 911 call that he did this because of U.S.-led interventions in Iraq and Syria, and he was doing this to get back at that. And it was like we said, it kind of had the makings of basically a news story that was automatically going to go national, obviously because of the scope of it, but just all the other tangential things that went along with it. Matt, what was your first reactions when you heard about this and kind of heard about the details?
Well, when you said this happened on social media, because this was this happened at around 2 a.m. in the morning. It's not like a lot of people are necessarily glued to their televisions, but if you're on Twitter like we are, if you're on social media like we are, you see some tweets breaking, reports of shots fired at Orlando nightclub, and you kind of think, oh, that's and as a side note, the day before, a finalist or a singer from The Voice was just killed in Orlando, like in this crazy attack the day before. She was doing a show, and she, a fan, quote unquote, just came up and shot her point blank. And that was kind of shocking to everybody because, I don't really watch The Voice and I don't watch American Idol or anything, but she had plenty of fans, and you're like, oh my God, like, how could somebody, I remember thinking the next day, like, how could somebody just go up to somebody, and shoot them point blank? Like, that's crazy to me. And then another shooting in Orlando, and you're like, oh, here we go again. And I remember, it wasn't I was looking at Twitter before I went to bed, and it wasn't something I was, I guess, actively following that night. I remember the next day there were reports of possibly 20 killed, and you think, oh my God, that's awful. And then I remember the mayor coming out in the press conference the next morning, and he said 49. And I just, I remember the floor. Like, I was just shocked that, and you talked about it was the intersection of so many things: terrorist attack, gun control, crime, because it was a gay nightclub. And this is when I think this is when the cable news guys and then the local news people, I think this is where they do their best work, to tell you the truth, is when we hear from people who are directly at the scene, because that's really what we want to know. The police aren't going to be able to the media right then and there, so we start hearing about people who were in there, who got out. You start seeing the pictures, obviously, people are bleeding. I had to, just working with state government because of the gun control issue, this was something that had fallout here in Tallahassee, even though this was in Orlando, because then gun control became a huge issue. And say what you want about this being politicized. I mean, almost every severe event like this is politicized in some way, but gun control became a big issue. It was no fly, no buy. He, at some point, Mateen had been on a terror watch list. He had been interviewed by the FBI, but he was still allowed to buy a gun, and people asked how, why. So this became a political issue afterwards, and I covered some of the political wrangling, a GOP-led state, and those kind of gun control measures aren't really going to get through our GOP legislature. So a lot of people accused the Democrats of just grandstanding on the issue at the time. So this did become a politicized issue. But I just remember, speaking of how the coverage unfolded, the thing that stuck with me, and I knew it was in June. June 12th to be exact. I didn't know the exact date when we started talking about what we're going to talk about. I knew it was in June, but I remember clear as day the one story that stuck with me the most, coming from a local report, was responders are having a tough time because they just keep hearing phones buzzing and going off while they're in there. And I remember just hearing that and how much that shook me. And that's just something I never thought about before. And that was something that came out of one of the local news reports. And so it's like information like that you don't really think about, that obviously isn't good news, but it's necessary news, because that is just something, that isn't really something I thought about in the immediate aftermath. But if you're a first responder and you're just hearing because friends and family are trying to get in contact with their loved one, I mean, that's just something I never would have imagined. And that's what really stuck with me from that whole story.
And that's the human element that local news got to, and they reported. And I think that's why that local news will always have a place. The cable news networks are huge, but local news folks get that kind of stuff. And that's what humanizes things. That's what connects people to stories like this and makes it real for people, because we can hear about a mass shooting anywhere, but stuff like that it just tears your heart out when you think about that kind of stuff. So that was obviously one of the bigger stories. We'll go into the next one, and this story kind of unfolded. It's been a long process of unfolding. It's still going on right now, and that's the water crisis in Flint, Michigan. Back in 2011, the city of Flint changed its water source from Detroit and their water, their municipal water system. They got their water from Detroit. They changed their source to the Flint River. The Flint River, not exactly the most well-treated water source, but that's what they went with. And basically what happened was all the lead pipes and the plumbing that has been in that city for almost 100 years in some spots, that's lead-based. A lot of the water that wasn't treated properly was basically letting that lead pipe-based plumbing let lead seep into the water source in Flint and contaminate a bunch of people's water supply. And it led to multiple people getting sick. It led to children getting sick, which are the most susceptible to lead poisoning. As of right now, anywhere between 6,000 and 12,000 children have been exposed to the drinking water with the high levels of lead. Lawsuits galore that have been filed. And the city declared a state of emergency. Also, the federal government declared a state of emergency in Flint to try to get some funds to those folks to combat this. And lots of people have been fired or resigned because of this. 4 government officials from the city of Flint. 2 were from the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality. They had to resign, and a couple of people were fired. So 13 criminal cases filed against local and state officials in regards to this crisis. So this was a local story that went national very, very quickly because of, number one, the government corruption. Not government corruption, but I guess the government oversight or lack thereof, I guess, of this crisis. And then number 2, the public safety and the public health crisis that ensued because of this. And I don't even think we're going to know the full scope of what happened here until years down the road, because these kind of health issues manifest themselves later in life, especially for children. So we're hoping and praying that this isn't as bad as we think it is now, but all signs point to this being a catastrophe for the city of Flint.
And right, and here's the thing, though. I wondered, this story, would this still be going on without dogged reporting? I mean, so the Flint Journal, MLive, it's like a quad weekly newspaper. It's not like the Detroit Free Press or anything. It wasn't one of their bigger newspapers, but they were able to uncover that Flint water officials were falsely saying that the water treatment plant had detected no lead in testing homes. So they had falsified this information. They got this through the Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, which is what you ask for, but it's kind of hit or miss. But they were able to get these documents, and they were able to expose this, that, yeah, the water isn't good. But I wonder, had this not happened, had there not been people there who said, okay, people are claiming to get sick, what's going on here? Is this still going on today? And that's a scary thing to think about, because the people in charge of making sure your water is okay were claiming that it was when it actually wasn't. And it's just a scary thought that if there were not reporters in place to do this fact-finding, to expose this corruption, how many more people are we looking at that are getting sick? And these people who are getting sick, low-income, poor people that don't really have the means sometimes to fight for themselves. So, I mean, that if there is a silver lining in this, it's that good reporting, or the mission of trying to do good reporting really ended up saving a lot of people. And that's, I mean, if there is a silver lining in this, but like you said, we're not going to know the depth of this catastrophe probably for many, many years.
And that's what worries me about the rhetoric that came from a certain presidential candidate this year about not being able to trust the media. And, you know, they're all liars and you can't, you know, don't take anything they say, you know, as truth, because that's our job. That's why the First Amendment is in place, to be able to uncover stuff like this and to be the watchdogs for the people that don't have a voice. You know, we work, people can watch us for free on TV. We work for the people. You know, they give us a news tip, we go investigate. You know, we don't all just do, you know, slander pieces and murders and stuff like that. We get news tips and we go investigate. And I don't know how they came upon this. I don't know if it was a reporter that wanted to ask questions, or if it was somebody that called their news tip line and said, hey, you know, my water tastes funny and now my kid is getting sick. You know, that kind of thing happens every single day. And if it wasn't for those reporters, who knows? So when we get the attitude that you can't trust the media, we're all liars, we can't be trusted, it's a sad state of affairs, because we, you know, not me specifically, but, you know, I'm a weather guy, but you and other reporters out there that are doing their level best to try to uncover this kind of corruption and these kind of stories are trying to tell the truth. They're trying to get the facts. They're trying to help people. And some people don't understand that, unfortunately, or don't want to understand that, just because they might be put in a certain light and it doesn't flatter them. But we're all telling the truth here, or we're trying to. There are very few people and very few reporters, even though a lot of the cases that we hear about of, you know, falsifying reports or whatever from reporters do happen. The vast majority of people are trying to tell the truth and trying to tell the stories that might uncover some wrongdoing to help people. So,
and giving people information, and you know, you just said I'm just a weather guy, but like, think of when a big storm hits, you give people necessary information. Hey, you know, if there's a hurricane coming, and you know, we'll talk about that in a little bit. But you know, if there's severe weather, you want to give people good enough information so that they're in danger. You know, and not every story's that way, obviously. You know, thankfully, Flint water crises don't happen every day. You know, thankfully, I'm thankful for that. But at the end of the day, people are trying to give information, tell them what happened, not tell them what to think, but tell them what happened, and then they can make their own judgments. And yeah, when people do, I guess it's easy for us to get offended when people say the media, the media, the media. But at the same time, I mean, at least you and I know a lot of our friends, we're out there to try to do our jobs, not trying to slander anybody. We're out there to try to do our jobs, and that's give people the truth. So,
yep. All right. The last story we'll talk about is a story that is also kind of a confluence of different stories from this year. Back in July, Dallas police officers were caught in an ambush. And 5 of them were killed, 2 were injured. Micah Xavier Johnson was a shooter in Dallas of these police officers. And this was also noteworthy because this was the largest loss of law enforcement life, police life, since 9/11. A little bit different, obviously, but 5 police officers killed in one event. And Micah Xavier Johnson basically did this, report said, because of the retaliation. He was angry over police shootings of black men that happened just a few days before, Alton Sterling in Baton Rouge, and then Philando Castile in Minnesota. And he went on a shooting rampage, and he wanted to get back at you know, what his words were, and some of the reports that came out of his mouth were he wanted to kill white people, especially police officers, especially law enforcement. And this was a this was a broader subject that I figured would be better encapsulated in this story, was the shootings of black men, unarmed black men, and this kind of came to a head. It was a rough thing to go through, to be a law enforcement officer, and also to be someone who was so, if you were obviously part of the Black Lives Matter movement, or just someone in general who thought these shootings were unjustified. This kind of put all of that, encapsulated it all into one story. And just unfortunate that these kind of events still happen, still ongoing, but this one was just the confluence of all that.
And that night, so this was, this happened because there was a large protest that was, there were protests all across the country after, like you said, the people, the Black Lives Matter movement were protesting the killings of unarmed black men, and these protests were happening all across the country. And I remember watching, I think they were showing the one in Dallas and the one in Seattle and the one in maybe Oakland simultaneously. They had, a bunch of them on the screen at the same time. And then all of a sudden I remember seeing, you could see in one of the boxes, it looked as if there was an officer down, and then you see people scrambling, running. And I just remember watching whatever network or cable news I was watching, and they just didn't know what to say. They didn't know what was going on. It was a mass confusion at the same time. And it was just one of those, it's one of those things where you at least for me, and this, I don't like to say I think of the worst case scenario, but all of this happened. And again, I think this is just the times we live in. It's not like this stuff didn't happen before. I'm a big advocate of saying that. It's not like these things didn't happen before. It's not like unarmed men or unarmed people haven't been killed before in America. It's police officers, unfortunately, the whole thing is just an unfortunate. It's happened before, but we see it now. And when we see it, so we see these videos of, allegedly unarmed men being killed and all of this, and that shocks everyone. And then you see the protests and how outraged people are. And then you see this, and it's one of those moments where I just thought to myself, what is going on in this country? Mm-hmm. And it was, obviously you have in this staunch proponents of both sides, whether you want to say the Black Lives Matter movement or the Blue Lives Matter movement or All Lives Matter or whatever, that whole thing got out of control too. But at the end of the day, it to me is whatever side you're on, this many people don't have to be dying. And that's always what I think of, okay, police officer, you don't want police officers to die. I don't want police officers to die. I don't think anybody in their right mind wants police officers to die. I don't think anybody in their right mind wants unarmed men, women, anybody to die, at the hands of police. I don't think people want our police officers out there just shooting people. And that it became this situation where you had to pick a side during this. You're either with police or you're against police. You're either with minorities or you're against minorities. Well, can't you be with both? That's what I thought of through this whole thing was, so apparently police are just, depending on who you talk to, police are just killing people, and then the police are getting killed, and then you're either with us or against us. At the end of the day, this many people didn't need to die. And that was, when I was watching this whole, and this was during the summer, I was just thinking, what is going on? Are we going to see this every week now? And I have seen a lot of stories this year of police officer ambushes and of the video shows shooting person XYZ. It's just crazy. And again, is that just because we're seeing it now, or is it happening more? And I don't have the data. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, it's more shocking because we can see it. It's put on Facebook Live. We have so many ways to see this kind of stuff now, and it almost is like it doesn't shock us anymore, which is very disturbing. The fact that this is so out there now and it's so common, we're desensitized. And I always felt that when we get to any point where any atrocity is commonplace and we don't have to worry about it anymore, that we've hit a critical mass point. We need to kind of reevaluate things. But I think you hit it right on the head, where we don't have to be on a side. We can say, why can't we just stop killing each other? It's a pretty simple, notion. Let's holster the guns until we can, we figure things out. But I think it's just some people have quick triggers or whatever. And
this is
out of hand pretty quick.
It's like it isn't even a gun control conversation. This is just, I don't think this many people need to die, no matter what. And that's not being, am I biased toward people not dying? Yeah, I guess so. I guess I'm very biased toward people not dying. Like it's one of those things that, and I know a lot of people feel the same way when they watch this stuff on TV. Like, I really thought we were going to see that every week. I really thought we were just going to see violence in the streets and like see it, see it, whether, like you said, Facebook Live or Twitter. Like I'm not naive. Yeah, there is violence in the streets every week. Depends on where you live. I mean, maybe not in Tallahassee, maybe not in Birmingham where we're from, but there are plenty of people out there who see violence in the streets every week. And I think people are desensitized. They just say, oh, look at that. They go to bed, they wake up. Oh, look at that. They go to bed, they wake up. And that's, yeah, we are at a point where if that is commonplace, then we probably lost that fight. That's not a good, that's my opinion, not a good thing. Yeah.
Well, I agree with that opinion, and hopefully a lot of other people do too. So those are kind of top stories, national stories of 2016. But we both covered some pretty interesting things this year, and we'll talk briefly about those. And we'll start with you, Matt. So we said we weren't going to get too much into the 2016 election, and we won't get into the broad scope of it. But in Florida in 2016, it's always a hotbed of politics come general election time, and this year was no different for you, covering a lot of the political happenings for the Capitol News Service there in Tallahassee. So I guess start off with what were your assignments? What were some of the more kind of spotlighted assignments that you had to do as far as the political
topics? The juicier topics in Florida. Well, yeah, and let's not get around it. We know the biggest story this year was the election. Like that was the biggest story. That was it depends on who you are. That was the most shocking thing you've ever seen. That was the best thing you've ever seen. That was the worst thing you've ever seen. It just depends on how you feel. So yes, the election was the biggest story of the year. Those other stories we talk about were also very big, and they should not be forgotten. So, Florida votes in our history of botching elections is always this crazy, what's going to happen? Are they going to get it right? Which way are they going to go? Because usually the winner of Florida is within a 1% margin of the loser of Florida. So the state could go red or blue like that. Trump had made his way to Florida many times. Hillary came here. The president came here. The vice president came here, because 29 electoral votes, usually the person who wins Florida goes on to win the election. That's just how it happens. And, I personally covered 2 Trump guys when he was in town, and in danger, you would see a lot of people getting mad or booing the media. He would direct them to boo the media. And it was kind of funny at first. There were definitely some people who took it too far, I think, but I never felt in danger. But I'm also, a pretty big dude. I can handle myself. If I was there were reports I read of female reporters or minority reporters, Black reporters, Hispanic reporters, Muslim reporters who got it much worse than me. And when I read that sort of stuff, it broke my heart. But I guess, so covering that was in itself just a surreal scene. And it was then that I really thought, because I think everybody sort of laughed when Donald Trump announced his candidacy. He came down that big escalator at Trump Tower and he said he was going to run for president, and people sort of laughed. And, he's having these rallies, saying these outlandish things. And rally, and I know this now, I mean, it's not revisionist history or anything, but looking back, you could see the writing on the wall. Like, these people weren't just there for the show. They were there they were going to vote. And looking back, I think if, because everybody said the polls got it wrong, how could anybody see this coming? If you went to a rally, looking back, you see it coming. And yeah, hindsight's 20/20. But these were fired up people. And I'm a big proponent of being fired up about democracy. So that's good. I mean, vote for whoever you think is going to be the best choice. But if you're fired up about voting, that's great. And these people were fired up. And I was a little too young to really understand how fired up people, I think, were about Obama's first term, because it was the same type of thing, like whether people want to admit it or not, it was the same type of momentum. Obama had the same type of momentum that Trump kind of carried it over, and Trump used social media like Obama used social media, and the similarities are very striking. But if you were there, like, just every word, laughing, cheering, it was a scene. But so that, everybody sort of saw that play out, at least in Florida too. We had a lot of other stuff going on. Medical marijuana was a big issue. And medical marijuana is one of those things that I think people don't quite understand, that marijuana is very much illegal. I mean, it's still a federal offense. But, states are doing their own thing, and there's still all this gray area. Medical marijuana, I feel like, is picking up more steam as being more acceptable, because especially for a terminally ill person, for you to say, no, I don't want you to try that. If they only have a couple months to live, it's tough to deny somebody, yeah, don't do that. So medical marijuana was a big thing. And, covering that, I got to talk to people who have gone to Colorado and used medical marijuana, and that, I wasn't with them, so I can't, but their claims, at least this one family, it's a prominent family here in Florida, or they're not prominent, but they're like the face of the medical marijuana movement. Their daughter suffers from terrible, terrible seizures, and they got her some cannabis oil, and the daughter can function. And they've shown the videos, and you just watch it and your jaw drops. And it's tough, in an unbiased way, it's tough for me to say, that little girl should not be able to use this and feel better. It's tough for me to say that. It's tough for anybody who watches that to say that. So when you saw that fight forming, the guy who was leading that fight, he's a prominent lawyer in Florida. His name's John Morgan. Morgan & Morgan. His face is all over the billboards. For the people, it. So Morgan & Morgan, John Morgan's leading this fight for medical marijuana. And, of course, you have the wave of the presidential election. And 2 years ago, it had narrowly failed, by less than 2% it needed from the vote to pass. So, and you have the Florida Sheriff's Association saying, we don't want this to pass. And it's just this weird fight, and you see it forming. And then you hear the real stories from the people who it helps. That, that's the cool part. And so that was probably our biggest non-presidential issue. And the last thing I'll say about covering this political season, I'm going to talk about something that maybe only myself and 3 other people in this whole state know about. But it was a local candidate for Congress. His name was Walter Dartland. He was running for a congressional seat in a very red area in the Panhandle. I mean, he was basically fighting a losing battle. He's an older guy. He's a nice guy, great guy. But one of his, not constituents because he wasn't elected, but a supporter noticed that Walter Dartland, who's again up against his GOP opponent, had millions of dollars. Dartland, had a couple grand. I don't know. So he says, Walter, you don't have any signs. You don't have any political signs that you're putting up anywhere. And I guess Dartland really didn't have the budget for it. So one of his supporters goes out and hand paints 300 political signs. Hand paints them. Just Walt Dartland for Congress, blah, blah, and just puts them up around the town. Didn't get paid for it. Didn't raise any coin for it. Just did it because, he was a supporter of Walter Dartland. And I was able to interview the guy, and it was a great story. And you watch him paint the signs, and he's got more artistic ability than I've ever had in my life. And that story to me, as much of a drop in the bucket in the grand scheme of things it is, that to me was like, this is democracy in action almost. This is people taking charge and really being involved in the political process. And this is probably getting way too nerdy or way too wistful for some people. But like, to me, it was like, wow, that is awesome. Like, I have never seen something like that before. Yeah, it's one thing you want to go to a candidate rally. That's great. People go to rallies. But this guy was hand-painting signs and putting them up around Tallahassee. Like, that's something I've never seen before. That was probably my favorite. That was my favorite story I covered in what was really a long, trying political year. So that was Walt Dartland did not win, but it wasn't because of lack of effort.
There you go. Yeah, it's
but
yes.
So on the other end, politics, yeah, okay. 2016 election.
Mm-hmm.
But Florida, and you're not even in Florida, you're from Florida.
Mm-hmm.
Florida had faced something this year that they hadn't faced in over a decade.
Mm-hmm.
And you got the chance to cover it all the way from Birmingham, Alabama. You came down to Florida.
You're right.
And that was Hurricane Matthew.
Correct.
So why don't you tell us about that?
Correct.
Well, I did a lot of my work. South, a little bit in South Carolina, but mostly in Georgia. And I did spend just a fraction of a second in Florida. So you had Hurricane Hermine, which hit Florida a little bit earlier in the year. And then you had Matthew. And Matthew was a behemoth of a storm in the Caribbean. It was supposed to make a pretty close pass to Florida, which it did. It didn't really make a direct hit on Florida, but threatened enough of the coast, and there were enough impacts along the coast of Florida, east coast of Florida, that it was felt. We're talking from probably Daytona Beach all the way up to Jacksonville and St. Augustine and places like that. Did the majority of its damage, though, in Georgia, South Carolina, and then in North Carolina, too. So my station is part of the ownership group of Media General, and basically what I was on was a go team. They said, Nate, get your bag ready. If we are deployed, we're going to send you to wherever. Our first spot was going to be Myrtle Beach. And they said, get your stuff ready. You're going, and you'll have a couple of hours notice, but then you're going to be on the road. I'm like, okay. Well, that call came on a Wednesday, and we were off. And Matthew was still way down the Caribbean, about to come close to Florida. So we're driving to Myrtle Beach, and they say, you know what? Reroute. We're going to get you down in Savannah. So we started our coverage on a Wednesday on Tybee Island. Now, Tybee Island is a small barrier island that is just off the coast of Savannah. And they were already getting ready on Wednesday. This thing was 3 days out. They were already getting ready. Got some interviews and things with folks that were boarding up their businesses, almost ready to get out of town. And we had to do, and the logistics of it were pretty difficult. So we had to do look lives. And what I mean by that is, standing there in front of the mic and, do a little spiel, record it like we did it live, and then send it off to all these different stations in our ownership group. And we did those look lives for about 30 to 35 different stations. And they had to be sent off at a deadline, and we had to do it by this time and send them off. So that was Wednesday. Thursday, we were in Tybee Island when they were ordering mandatory evacuations. We got to speak with the mayor of Tybee Island. We got to speak with some of the emergency management officials. That's when some of the major networks started showing up. CNN was there. We ran into them. Ran into Fox News as well. Saw their truck rolling around in Savannah as well. And it was kind of surreal to see all of the different agencies that were involved in this, taking action. It is a lot goes into it. When you see an evacuation order come out and you wonder who does it and who gets into the action, there are a lot of moving parts. There's law enforcement, there's fire and rescue, there's animal control, there's the Visitors and Convention Bureau, the Chamber of Commerce. All those people are involved in trying to get people to where they need to go, because you've got to find places for these people to stay once they get out. You've got to find transportation for these people once they get there. It is a logistical nightmare. So that was Thursday, basically preparing for the worst. Friday, we stayed in Savannah. We were in Savannah down the riverfront watching this. Actually, Thursday, we went down. I'm trying to remember this stuff now. Thursday, we went down to Kingsland, Georgia, which is just over the border of Florida. You could basically see Jacksonville from across this inlet. And we did live shots there. And when we did live shots, not just for our station, but for several other of those Media General stations. In the rain and the wind, it started to pick up. On Friday, we were back in Savannah, and that's when it really started to kick in. The weather down on the riverfront, there's a river street. If you've ever been to Savannah, historic. It's been there for 200 years, 300 years, however long it's been there. Some of the buildings are so old, but things started getting real pretty quickly. A lot of the river started coming into the parking lots. The winds were 50, 60 miles an hour, but some of the narrower alleys, if you stood in the alley, the wind picked up to 70 or 80 miles an hour, just the wind tunnel effect it had. I posted some pretty cool videos on my social media if you want to go check those out. Go look back into the beginning of October and you'll be able to find those. But we were doing live shots during this whole thing. And we had to coordinate these live shots. We had a grid that said, okay, you're going to do this live shot for San Francisco at this time. You're going to do this live shot for Richmond, Virginia at this time. You're going to do a live shot for, name a place, Lafayette, Louisiana, name a place. We did live shots for them. We did over 70 live shots during a 4-day span. And the Friday night was basically Friday night into Saturday, the storm was rolling in. Saturday morning, we were at our hotel. The storm was at its peak in Savannah. And it was kind of surreal standing out. I had never done this before. And I always thought the people that stood out in the storm were a little bit nutty. But there I was standing out in, 80, 90 mile an hour winds with tree limbs literally breaking around me at our hotel because we were flooded in. The water had gotten to the hotel parking lot. We were standing in about 1.5 feet of water. It was even deeper in some other parts. And we were nowhere even close to the actual riverfront. This was all rainwater that had drained down into our hotel. So at the same time, we lose power in hotel too. I'll get to that in a second. So standing out there doing live shots in hurricane conditions, not exactly my idea of a fun time, but I'm a meteorologist. That's why I did this. So our hotel loses power. And we didn't have power in our hotel. This was Saturday morning. We didn't have power the whole day. We didn't have a hot meal. After the storm blew out, we went back to Tybee Island, the place we were at Thursday that got evacuated, and went back and looked at some of the damage. We weren't exactly allowed to go back on Tybee, but some of the other barrier islands, Wilmington Island, we were there, and it was interesting because some of the spots were looking like war zones. Some of them were untouched. A lot of trees down, trees on houses. It was unbelievable. Basically, what you would see in a hurricane, aftermath. But we were there. We interviewed a lady who had a tree fall so close to her house. It was basically, 1 foot to 2 feet away from coming through her window where she was sleeping. She missed death by about 2 feet during the night. Talking to her was emotional. She was emotional. She cried, and it was amazing. It was just the raw emotion that you look for in a news story, in an interview, and we got it. We just happened to hear a chainsaw going. A guy was trying to chainsaw through a big tree that was in the middle of his driveway, and we happened upon these people. Toward the rest of the island, it was crazy how much devastation there was. They're still cleaning up from it there now, 2.5 months later. We weren't allowed back on Tybee Island just because they didn't know the devastation yet. The infrastructure there was still a little shaky. There was a bridge that might have been washed out. There was a lot of moving parts to this. And that was Saturday night. Still had no power in our hotel. We didn't have a hot meal except for Waffle House, which was unbelievable. They have a Waffle House index. It's kind of a made-up thing. You know how big of a disaster it is if the Waffle Houses were open? Well, it was closed earlier in the day, but it was finally open at night, and it was packed because nobody had power. It was weird because there were National Guard and police patrolling, and they were basically the only cars on the street. And everybody was at Waffle House. We waited for half an hour for scrambled eggs and hash browns. It was the best meal we had, for 24, 36 hours. That Sunday morning, we got up. We went back to where the bridge was near Tybee Island, and it was still closed. And the National Guard was still there. Talked to the National Guard guys. No way we were going to get back on the island. Still unsafe for just regular passersby to go and cover this. And this is where I met one of the local reporters at one of the stations in Savannah, WSAV, and to talk to her about what she did during that. And I kind of played the role of the national media guys coming in on a local story because we were sent by our company that has several TV stations around the country, and we were doing this for those TV stations. It wasn't our local market, and it's kind of like you don't want to step on their toes, but you want to be able to tell the story for everybody around. And getting the gist from her. Her name was Meredith. And she was very gracious with her time and kind of told me what she had done. And she had, there were people sleeping at the station, and they worked tirelessly for 3 days on this story, before, during, and after. And they were still working when we left. And it's amazing to see those people, what they had to go through. We lost power in our hotel. We didn't have power. We didn't have power when we left. We didn't shower. The conditions were terrible. That there were people being escorted out of the hotel via ambulance because they couldn't take it. But they lived in that situation for a week without power, and for some people. So I admire what they did. But covering that hurricane, when we got chosen to do this, people were, "Oh, you're so lucky, you get to go do this," and did you have fun? No, we did not have fun doing this. This was all work. We didn't have one bit of fun. We had very little downtime. We had very little sleep. We were up early, went to bed late. But that's news. That's why I got into the business, and I was happy to do it. But that was probably the highlight of 2016 for me, was to get to cover that storm. And obviously it did a lot of devastation. A lot of people were impacted. But as a meteorologist, those are the kind of situations that you want to be in, that you want to tell the story, you want to be a part of it. And I was lucky I got to be.
And it's cool to look back on it now. I mean, at the time it wasn't, thinking about what you went through, and talking about it, it's cool. And,
would I do it again? 100%. Absolutely.
And that's important. And what we said before, what did you do? You got the information out to people. You mentioned that you weren't the local guy. The local reporters are getting the information out to their local people, but people around the country who are watching in fascination as this, huge storm is moving toward closer to the coast. You got the information out to them. You told them what they needed to know, and it's tough. Hurricane Hermine, which rolled through Tallahassee, was nothing like what Matthew did, especially further up the coast, I think into the Carolinas.
Yeah.
Nothing like it. But, there were a bunch of trees down here. It's just crazy to see that scene. And when you see a storm-devastated town, whether it's in the plains, after a tornado rolls through or what, or, if you see a blizzard up north where, I'm originally from, and everything's covered in snow, it's like this crazy scene. It's kind of cool and it's kind of scary all at the same time. When Hermine rolled through here, I lost power for 8 days, and I never knew how much I actually relied on power until you don't have it for 8 days and you turn into the world's biggest baby. But it could have been a lot worse, obviously. So I imagine, just covering that whole scene. You said it before, at times must have been just surreal.
Yeah, it was. Seeing the National Guard, roll through on these big Humvees, guns drawn, basically had the guns, sitting right here just in case. Yeah, I've never seen that before. You don't see that. I'd also never seen a Publix as busy as I saw the one in Savannah. Literally, catty corner from our hotel was a Publix. It was the only thing open the morning after the storm rolled in. And it had backup generators. I think most of the Publixes do, and they're able to be open and distribute stuff. But we just went in and looked. You think it's bad when there's only like one cashier on a Saturday afternoon trying to get groceries? Every cashier, every lane was open, and we're talking lines that snaked around the back of the store just to get a few bottles of water, just to get a gallon of water, just to get some cereal bars, just to get something to sustain yourself. And these people suffered for days after this. And it was just, I'd never been anything like that. I hope I never have to, but I'd never been anything like that. And it was crazy to see. And the police were standing guard, and the National Guard was out there directing traffic. It was just a weird thing, man. I'd never been through it, and I'm happy I got to report it and got to see it firsthand. But my heart went out to those people, and I'm glad they're doing better now. But it was a long recovery for them, I'm sure.
And I guess that's 2016, huh? It's just a crazy year for a lot of people.
I guess we're all recovering.
Trump, Hillary for me, hurricanes for you, and everything in between. I know it's only our third episode, but it's kind of cool to take a look back at what happens in a year, and kind of wonder about what's going to happen next year. I have no idea. I said it before, though. I'm sure more bad things are going to happen. I'm sure great things are going to happen, and who's going to be there to cover it? Maybe not you and I personally, but people like us are going to be there to cover it. So it's interesting always to watch it unfold, for better and for worse. It's always interesting, and that's why. And we'll keep talking about it.
Yes, we will. And next week we'll return to our, our original format, or our
regular format,
regularly scheduled programming, where we'll have we'll talk about some more irreverent news from around the country, which we've posted some. I've seen some stuff, and we've posted that on our website, behind the screens podcast.com. A couple of just silly stories, one from Florida, of course, and we'll have a guest next week that'll shed some insight on a story that he or she has covered over the last few weeks, or whenever that time frame is, and they can give you some of their insight on how they covered a particular story, and we'll have a good conversation about it.
Ryan Seacrest hasn't gotten back to me yet. We're probably still waiting to see how New Year's Rockin' Eve plays out. So maybe who knows? I don't know. I don't want to tease anything. I don't want to promise anything, but he hasn't gotten back to me yet.
Well, is he the one that hangs out with Kathy Griffin?
It's like him and Anderson Cooper.
And Anderson Cooper and Kathy Griffin, they get drunk and they have whatever they
living the life,
living their best life, living their best life. All right. Well, for Matt, I'm Nate, and we will see you next year, folks.
Happy New Year.